Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, December 7th. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Asa Winstanley, John Elmer, and Ali Abunimah. We have a very packed show today, so please stay tuned. It's day 62, and we enter the third month of Israel's genocidal attacks. Where do I even start? 350 Palestinians were killed in the last 24 hours in Gaza. As of this morning, 17,177 Palestinian men, women, and children have been killed in Gaza by the Israeli military since October 7th. More than 46,000 have been injured. However, these numbers don't include thousands of people still being reported missing under the rubble, or those who have died from disease and lack of access to medical treatment under Israel's complete siege. The Israeli military has expanded its ground invasion into the southern Gaza Strip, ordering Palestinians sheltering in 5 United Nations schools to leave. That was yesterday, while carpet bombing entire neighborhoods across southern Gaza overnight and into today. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza evacuated most patients and staff in the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Jabalia refugee camp. The UN said the hospital largely stopped functioning and ceased admitting new patients. Out of 24 hospitals in the northern Gaza Strip, only 2 small hospitals are still able to admit patients. Ashraf Al-Qadra, the spokesperson for the health ministry in Gaza, said that the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital in Gaza City, quote, has lost its capacity to treat patients in the face of the large number of injuries, and the wounded are bleeding to death. The United Nations World Food Program said that households in northern Gaza are, quote, experiencing alarming levels of hunger. At least 97% of households in northern Gaza have, quote, inadequate food consumption, with 9 out of 10 people going 1 full day and night without food. Yesterday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced that he has invoked Article 99 of the UN Charter. This invocation means that the Security Council will hold a special session, ostensibly to address Israel's attacks on Gaza. But of course, it's unclear what will come of this Security Council session, since the U.S. holds veto power and can use it on Israel's behalf. We'll get more into all of this. We'll have a very full show today, including a discussion with John on reports that Israel is planning or attempting to flood the tunnel network under Gaza, as well as the gains by the Palestinian resistance against the Israeli army, and much more. But first, Asa has some new reportage on the latest revelations about how Israel killed Israeli citizens on the 7th of October. Asa, please tell us more.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Nora. Since the 7th of October, a steady stream of testimonies has been flowing out of Israel, showing that a large number of the hundreds of Israelis who were killed during the Palestinian resistance assault on the military bases and settlements along the frontier with Gaza were actually killed by Israeli airstrikes, tank shelling, and the occupation forces' generally chaotic response. Now, you as readers of the Electronic Intifada, as well as our regular listeners and viewers, will know a lot about this story already, and we've been covering it for a while now. And a couple of weeks ago, we published this long investigative piece that I wrote about all this story, and it rounded up most of the evidence that had emerged to date at that point. Now, that piece was based on more than a month of intensive research, which involved almost the entire EI team. When I finally came to write the piece up, it was actually hard to keep track of all the evidence that this had really happened, just because there is so much of it. But even in the 2 weeks since that piece was published, there's been new testimonies that have continued to emerge time and time again. And the mainstream media is, for the most part, so far, ignoring it. Now, I just want to talk briefly today about my latest story, which is reporting on another example of an Israeli testimony that shows, yet again, that a large number of the civilians killed on the 7th of October were killed not by Hamas, not by Palestinians, but by Israeli forces themselves. In a Hebrew language podcast, an Israeli Air Force colonel admitted that his forces blew up Israeli homes in the settlements using drones and helicopters. The colonel's name is Nof Erez. He's a reservist, but like many reservists, it seems he was called up to active service on the 7th of October. Now, according to the Haaretz podcast host, Erez was there that day watching events unfold live in an Air Force Command headquarters. Now, Erez's testimony backs up previous accounts in the Hebrew language media. A previous account by an anonymous Israeli helicopter pilot who stated that they shot at, quote, everything along the fence with Gaza that day. But there was something truly new in Erez's interview. He confirmed that Israel invoked something called the Hannibal Directive. Now, you as our viewers and listeners will have probably heard about this before. It was named after an ancient Carthaginian general who poisoned himself rather than be captured alive. The Hannibal Directive was a military doctrine which was established in secret about 30 years ago by Israel to discourage Lebanese and Palestinian resistance fighters from capturing Israeli soldiers alive so that they could be used in prisoner exchanges. In 2011, the Palestinian resistance in Gaza famously exchanged the captured Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit for 1,027 Palestinian political prisoners who were being held hostage in Israeli jails, including Yahya Sinwar, who is now the leader of Hamas in Gaza. Here's a short clip of what Erez said in the Hebrew podcast. We're going to play the clip now, and then I'll sum up what he said in English for our listeners who won't be able to read the subtitles.
קרה פעם?
אנחנו לא יודעים אם נפגעו חטופים בשלב שהתחיל ירי של מסקרים וכתמ"מים על הגדר, כשראו את המסות שנכנסות ויוצאות.
נוהל חניבל, אבל זה בכוונה. זאת אומרת, אם הופעל, אז הוא הופעל בכוונה, אם נפגעו חטופים במקרה, זה משהו אחר.
נוהל חניבל כנראה הופעל באיזשהו שלב, כי ברגע שהבינו שיש חטיפה, אז הם מיד אומרים, חבר'ה, זה חניבל. אבל בחניבל שאנחנו התאמנו עליו כל ה-20 שנה האחרונות, זה רכב שיודעים מאיזה נקודה בגדר הוא נכנס, מאיזה רכב, באיזה צד הוא נוסע, ואולי אפילו על איזה ציר הוא נע. פה זה היה חניבל המוני, זה היה המון פתחים בגדר.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. For the benefit of our listeners, here's what was said in that clip, and to emphasize it as well, I suppose. The Haaretz podcast host Lior Kodner asks Erez directly if the Hannibal Directive was used on the 7th of October, quote, and did it happen this time? Erez then replies, quote, we don't know if hostages were harmed at the stage when helicopters and drones began firing towards the fence with Gaza, when they saw the masses entering and exiting. The host then pressed him further, and Erez then explicitly admits, quote, the Hannibal Directive was apparently applied at a certain stage, end of quote. He even explains that, quote, the Hannibal we trained for all of the last 20 years is for a vehicle we know at what point of the fence it enters, on what side it drives, and maybe even on which road it drives. But, he says, quote, this was a mass Hannibal. There were tons and tons of opening in the fence. Now, this podcast episode was first reported in English by the website The Cradle, which is one of the few independent outlets that have been covering this increasing mountain of evidence, along with ourselves, of course, the Grey Zone and Mondoweiss. To our knowledge, to my knowledge, this is the first Israeli admission by a senior Air Force officer, no less, that the Hannibal Directive was indeed applied on the 7th of October and that this did happen. For 2 months now, the evidence has suggested that this was very much the case. The indiscriminate and massive Israeli response to the Palestinian military assault on bases, military bases and Gaza frontier settlements very much suggested this. The Israelis appear to prefer that Israeli civilians be killed rather than fall into Palestinian hands as captives. And now we have explicit and official Israeli confirmation that the Hannibal Doctrine was indeed applied that day. So the next question to ask is the following: how much of all this was deliberate policy, and how much was the result of the chaotic nature of the Israeli response to the Palestinian military assault? It has also emerged that Israel appears to be quite literally burying evidence that could answer this question. Now, this is a story from the Jerusalem Post, which reported recently that cars containing the bloodstains or ashes of Israelis who died on 7th of October would be crushed, shredded, as they put it, in what the paper said, and also in what the paper said was the first, the cars' remains would be buried in a cemetery. Now, the Post provided a sort of religious pretext for all this. Nonetheless, this is a worrying development, which amounts to a state-sanctioned cover-up of what could potentially be some of the most important forensic evidence from the 7th of October. Given that the admissions of 2 Israeli pilots to date show that, number one, they shot at, quote, everything along the fence with Gaza that day, and number two, these new admissions that the Hannibal Directive was indeed applied, it is highly likely that many, if not most, of those cars were destroyed by Israeli drone and helicopter strikes, thus shooting or burning to death both their Israeli and Palestinian occupants alike. There is a lot that's still unclear about what really happened on the 7th of October, but one thing is for sure: we urgently need an independent international investigation to get to the full truth. Atrocity propaganda is Israel's main distraction tactic from the hideous genocide that it is carrying out right now against the civilian population of the Gaza Strip. That these alleged atrocities against Israeli civilians, those that ever really happened in the first place, may have, in fact, been carried out by Israel itself, is a truth that the Israeli government is desperate to stop getting out.
Thank you so much, Asa. And you can go, of course, to the Electronic Intifada's website, electronicintifada.net, and read Asa's recent reports. Thanks so much, Asa. In a few, go ahead, Ali.
Well, I don't know if we have time, Nora, for any questions for Asa.
Yeah, of course.
Well, thanks, Asa. I mean, it's, as you said, Asa, more and more evidence is coming out all the time. I have 2 questions for you. One is, do you see this starting to have an impact on mainstream discourse? I see Israel, at least in a lot of their spokespeople on social media that we look at, are complaining that Israel is not being believed. And this includes about, in general, what happened on October 7th, and what we talked about last time, the recent claim of mass rapes. They're putting out these desperate sounding posts on social media saying, now do you believe us? Now do you believe us? They did the same thing with Shifa Hospital after they announced, first of all, we're going to find this big command center. And then they didn't. And they found some basement room with tiled walls. And they said, now do you believe us? And yet, at the same time, they're not agreeing to or calling for any international investigation or any independent investigation. I mean, is it just as simple as they know that this is not credible and they don't want anyone to come and check it out? What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't really see any sign that this is breaking through to the mainstream yet, except on the margins. I mean, I think the only signs we've seen of that so far are very small, which was, we mentioned in your segment the other day about the mass rape fabrication that, Owen Jones's video, and he mentions this. He mentions some of the so-called friendly fire incidents, Yasmin Porat and so forth. He mentioned them in passing in that video, but only to sort of dismiss them as a kind of conspiracy theory, as Haaretz in English has stated. And I mean, so yeah, I don't see it breaking through at the moment, but we did see this week there was a segment on CNN which reported, I mean, I think we might talk about this later in the stream if we have time, about Israeli prisoners who'd been released from Gaza, who were talking about how they were in constant fear of being bombed by Israel while they were in Gaza. And this was very briefly covered on CNN. And, kind of in passing again. I think, they don't want an international investigation. And I mean, I suppose every time these wars happen, these genocidal wars happen against the Gaza Strip, there does tend to be calls for international investigations by all kinds of liberals usually, and human rights groups. And I suppose our normal response to that is, well, personally, I always feel like we don't need an international investigation to know what Israel's doing. But in this case, I think we do, because of the nature of what happened and how a lot of it is so unclear. And I mean, Israel does its best to kind of, there's the whole experience of the Goldstone report where he, the international investigator who was the human rights lawyer and so forth from South Africa, who later kind of partially recanted his investigation, which said that Israel had committed war crimes and so forth. And Israel always does its best to kind of stop these things happening. But I think in this case, they really, really don't want an investigation to happen. And we can see them kind of in real time covering up the evidence of it. As I mentioned, there's also how, one of the other things I've mentioned in my articles is how some of the dead have been buried without being identified. And your article, Ali, that the Israeli spokesperson Mark Regev has admitted that 200 of the dead that they had initially thought were Israelis were in fact Palestinian fighters. So it just shows the indiscriminate nature of all of this.
And they're literally bearing the evidence. I mean, there's all those hundreds of incinerated cars that were parked at the Nova Music Festival that the Israeli government said that they're going to be burying under the sand as some sort of like art installation tribute or something. I mean, but of course we all know why they're burying these cars that couldn't have been incinerated by a couple of AK-47s and an RPG. So,
and it's worth noting that when it came to Israel's claims about the hospitals being used as command centers and for weapons storage, that Hamas had very clearly and repeatedly called for an international investigation, and they'd called on the International Red Cross to bring international investigators to go to all the hospitals in Gaza and investigate the Israeli claims. So it's very clear that one side has something to hide.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Asa. And of course, we'll be uncovering all sorts of new revelations as time goes on. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by our contributors, Sawar El-Ejla and Ahmed Al-Aqsa. But first, we want to show two short videos by our contributor, Mohammed Assad, in Gaza that he made for us.
هنا يصطف عشرات المواطنين أمام إحدى محطات تعبئة الغاز. كميات الغاز التي دخلت إلى قطاع غزة في اليوم الأول من الهدنة والتي ستدخل هي ضئيلة جدا جدا، لا تكفي لحي حتى تكون لقطاع غزة 2.3 مليون إنسان. في القطاع. لذلك الاحتياج كبير جدا. هؤلاء يصطفون من الفجر وربما لن يجنوا غاز في هذا المكان. أصحاب هذه المحطة يقولون أنهم لم يصلهم أي كمية من الغازات، لأن الكميات التي دخلت ضئيلة جدا 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 ولا تكفي لكل المحطات في قطاع غزة. طبعا احنا بنضطر نعمل أكل على الحطب، لأنه كميات الغاز اللي دخلت قطاع غزة خلال فترة الهدنة هي كميات ضئيلة جدا، ومش كل كان أو أتيحت له الفرصة أنه يحصل على كميات من غاز الطهي. حتى البنزين نفس الشيء بالنسبة لحركة التنقل. طبعا هذا غدايا اليوم، بندورة على الحطب بعد يوم طويل عمل متعب شاق، وكمان زبدية الفول هذه. أصدقاء اللي فقدتهم بالعشرات، أصدقاء وأقارب، ويمكن إحنا ما زعلنا عليهم مش عشان قلوبنا قاسية، لا، علشان قدرتنا الذهنية لسه ما استوعبت إنه إحنا فقدنا هذا الكم من الناس اللي كانوا حوالينا وقريبين علينا، ولسه العقل مشغول بتأمين العائلة وكيف حتى أنا بدي أتحرك وأوثق هاي الحرب على غزة والصواريخ اللي بتنزل كل يوم والاستهدافات. بكرة بس تنتهي الحرب ونروح على غزة ونجلس على أطلال مدينتنا المدمرة، وقتها نتذكر أصدقائنا وأقاربنا اللي عاشوا معنا الحياة بحلوها ومرها، وقتها نتذكرهم وهنبكي عليهم.
Those were two videos sent to us, made for us by Mohammed Assad in Gaza, and we apologize that for our listeners who don't speak Arabic, that we will have, I mean, those videos are on our Instagram, and they do have English subtitles, so you can watch those on when you get a chance. But we do want to bring in our contributor Sawar Al-Aqsa. Sawar is she wrote a piece for us asking why many international medical professionals and institutions who spoke out about Ukraine are remaining silent about Palestine. Sawar, thank you so much for joining us again on the live stream.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Sawar.
Hi.
So first off, you're a physician. You worked in Gaza hospitals. Can you give us a sense of what your colleagues are facing right now, and what are the most pressing concerns that people in the medical field have for people in Gaza?
Okay. First of all, the healthcare system in Gaza now are shuttered, completely shuttered, and it turns all of it with the killing of healthcare workers. Like right till now, 277 have been killed, and 42 have been kidnapped. And with the lack of medical supplies and the overwhelming numbers of wounded, and previously the patients, sick patients, other than the wounded, it's consuming the healthcare system a lot. Of course, with no supplies to fit. That's why make a huge burden on physicians and colleagues in Gaza to deal with, and they are now just as first aid providers, if they could do it in safe area with recurrent and constant bombardments of facilities and healthcare centers.
And you wrote this piece for us last week. It's called Why Were West's Doctors Outraged About Ukraine But Silent About Gaza? And you go through a number of examples, including healthcare associations, medical associations here in the United States. There is one example, you report that a specialist in the UCLA healthcare system openly supported the killing and collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza, whom he called inbred. And you write, such dehumanizing comments would raise serious doubts about any individual's ability to provide unbiased care, and it calls into question a doctor's fundamental capacity to treat fellow humans with dignity. Can you give us a sense of your analysis here and what is happening inside medical associations and medical communities here in the West that still gives Israel this green light for genocide and for attacks on healthcare workers and patients?
Okay, the medical community response can be viewed as like at three levels: the physicians themselves, and the journals, and the associations or institutions. All of these, like together, make like they can like focus or encourage the genocide happening in Gaza, especially focusing on healthcare facilities, workers, and patients. So when like physicians, like Western physicians or like most doctors in all around the world, like trust the medical journals and institutions with their publications. So when they are when such journals and institutions, who are the most trusted sources for the doctors, change the picture and display it in like when one of these displayed it as questions of doubt, and how like doctors should have a degree in political science, so they can say if the attacks on healthcare system are it's good or not, or it should happen or not. So they are making doubts about if killing patients and doctors can be supported or not. So this kind of bias, and like when we say these biased and one-sided journals and institutions controlling the views of many doctors all around the world and guiding them towards supporting the genocide of Gaza is really concerning, and like raise the question about their credibility and how we should take their publications in questions of why in questions of how we take it or not, or their ethical evaluation of the publications that they publish, like articles or research. Take it.
And you also talk about the kind of language that these institutions and also international organizations like the World Health Organization and the Red Cross have been using in their official statements, employing the passive voice, not even mentioning who did the killing, Israel, of course. And you contrast that with the kind of statements that were put out in support of Ukraine. Can you talk a little bit about that and how language is being employed here as well?
They are mainly using the passive voice to refer, or if they wanted to refer to their staff who have been killed, like Dima Al-Haj, the WHO worker, and if they want, they say died. So their use of such terminology means that they don't want to condemn Israel for their crimes and against to what they do in Ukraine. For example, the American Surgical College have condemned directly the Russian military for their actions in Ukraine. So when you are afraid or don't want to refer such things, when Israel do it, either you support it or you're afraid of them.
Sawar, can you talk a little bit more about what physicians right now are demanding from the so-called international community and organizations that purport to protect and support healthcare all over the world? What are physicians in Gaza, your colleagues, your friends, demanding, and what are they not getting right now?
Of course, ceasefire now. They need immediate ceasefire because they can't take anymore, and everything is collapsing. And the second thing is not censoring their voices, because as a response of the JAMA publications where they wrote about the genocide and the attacks on hospitals, if it's questions or not. Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and Dr. Matt Gilbert has written a piece as a response to a letter to the editor to respond to such article, and they have fought like heavily for not for writing only Palestine as affiliation for Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐞. They wanted to write it as Middle East, West Bank, and Gaza, and refused to address Palestine as Palestine or at least occupied Palestinian territories. And Palestinians must fight for like publications, even if it was neutral, not addressing Israel as like just talking about the healthcare situation and humanitarian crisis. They have to fight for these publications, and it's either declined or get a heavy editing. And the third things that doctors like want, they a continuous supply of everything, even doctors, hospitals, field hospitals, medications, tools, everything.
And as we have been reporting, some of your colleagues, physicians in Gaza, including the head of Al-Shifa Hospital, Mohammed Abu Salmiya, have been abducted, arrested, and reports are that they are being interrogated and tortured by Israeli military forces. Can you talk about what is happening to the physicians and why Israel would be doing this against medical professionals?
We have tracked till now 42 kidnapped or arrested doctors. Israel abducted, not doctors, healthcare workers, and some of them have been released. And they're on why they are arrest doctors now, because the huge propaganda from the start since 7th October about hospitals and doctors being collaborators or being based military base for Hamas, and so now Israel arrested them like because they are doctors and maybe they have information about Hamas and other stuff, but they do know they are just civilians, doctors who know that, but just a kind of support to their propaganda.
If I can thank you, Siwar, and thank you for your article for raising that issue, because it's maddening to see the hypocrisy. Like everyone, every organization, every institution that spoke out about Ukraine but has remained silent about Gaza. It's not just in the medical field, it's in the cultural field, in the scientific field, in academia, and so on. I just want to give an update regarding Dr. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, who we talked about recently. He's one of the medical personnel who've been detained. He's the director of Al-Shifa Hospital, and he was abducted more than 2 weeks ago in Gaza. And according to the Jerusalem Post, reporting on 2 days ago, he is being investigated. The headline is Shifa Hospital Director Criminally Probed Under Emergency War Rules. And the Jerusalem Post says that Mohammed Abu Salmiya recently had a hearing before an unidentified Israeli civilian magistrates court via video conference, in which his detention was extended. He's being criminally probed by the Shin Bet, that's Israel's secret police and torture agency, under what the Jerusalem Post calls current war emergency regulations relating to Hamas and other terrorists connected to the war. And it says, as part of those regulations, Abu Salmiya is being prevented from meeting with a lawyer. So it's just incredible that this is happening with no international outcry, and that Israel can treat doctors, senior doctors, as if they are terrorists with nobody even knowing their name. I mean, I don't know, beyond those who closely follow what's happening in Gaza, how many people even know the name of Dr. Abu Salmiya?
Yeah, indeed. Suwar, can you give us a little bit more information on the reports that keep coming out about the spread of infectious diseases, treatable injuries that are not being treated because there are no supplies left, and emergency rooms are basically just first aid stations at this point. Can you talk a little bit about this ongoing medical catastrophe that we're all witnessing in Gaza?
Okay. I have contact with Dr. Duan. She is a family physician at primary healthcare, now volunteering in one of them. Like she said, she receives like daily 600 patients. Most of them have respiratory infections and gastroenteritis, as well as dermatologic skin infections. These are, of course, results from lack of clean water, no food, of course, and the crowded, not clean areas, especially in the schools and honor schools and shelters. And recently, my cousin Ahlam has passed away as a result of that. Her body is fragile. She can't tolerate such circumstances, such environments with no clean water and no good food. She was admitted to the hospital 1 month ago, and there was doctors there suspected Crohn's disease, which is treatable disease. And if it was, we couldn't confirm the diagnosis, but if it was confirmed, we can take care of it, as it's not treatable disease but controlled. But Hlam passed away because mainly maybe because of lack of medical care, with overwhelming number of patients and wanted, and of course delayed diagnostic tools, which is not available right now, especially for CT and other supportings. So Ahlam is one case of thousands of cases who die daily, either from simple disease that would be easily treated on normal days, like asthmatic patients who need just oxygen, not available, of course, who died maybe because at their houses because they can't access treatment and hospitals. Diabetic patients who are now can't find the medications and suffer from complications, which is life-threatening, of course. Hypertension and hypertensive emergencies can be treated easily at normal circumstances, but now no medications, no supplies. These patients are now dying silently, and of course are not counted on among those who have killed by direct pumping and rockets from Israel.
We're so sorry to hear about your cousin, Ahlam. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you and your family are going through. I mean, just we hear so much about the numbers and the statistics, and 17,000 killed so far, thousands more under the rubble, 46,000 injured, but there are no statistics yet on the number of people who have secondary injuries or are dying of secondary causes, not directly caused by Israeli bombing, but because of the collapse of the medical system and no food and no water and no sanitation. And this is part of the genocide that Israel is carrying out. It is deliberate and it is entirely man-made. This is an Israeli project of ethnic cleansing. Suwar, have you ever seen something this catastrophic in your life?
No, I've never seen, even if healthcare system basically was overstretched in Gaza. They have been something like the trucks that even pass through the Rafah cross border could be held, and doctors use it like wisely, let's say. But this collapse of system have never seen, and everything is lacking. Everything, even food. Food. We have. I haven't witnessed ever like this kind of food lack. Like water, and during the wars, I experienced like water, but food, it's more than it's maddening, just maddening how like such basic things are not affordable, are not there, and people die because of these. Like we are in 2023 and people are still dying of starvation, still dying, still not finding water. So
No, it's unbelievable. What can we say? How are you doing? How are you? You're in Canada, many thousands of miles away. You have a job doing research, medical research. How are you able to function these days?
I would say like Ahlam was not the only one. Maybe our loss is like not that much like compared to other people who lost like hundreds of their families. And I pray that it will be the last loss, so and we can have ceasefire so soon, and we can like hold up ourselves again, and together to have time to grieve and bury our kids, our dead. So
Amazing. Ali, did you have a question for Siwar?
I guess I'd like to know, Siwar, if you're still able to stay in touch with people in Gaza. Are you able to stay connected with your family, with your colleagues, with your friends? It's getting more difficult for us, and I just wanted to know if you're getting any updates.
like 3 days ago, the last contact was 3 days ago, but I sent like mass messaging to them, so anytime any one of them could like connect to internet, they can like respond to me and reassure me about their circumstances. And as for calls, sometimes it's there is networks and I can like talk to them, and sometimes no. Even people in Gaza don't know about each other. My father and brothers are in 𝐄𝐥𝐞 now, and the rest of the family are in a school shelter, so they don't know about those in Gaza, and I don't know about both. So it's funny. Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's incredibly difficult. I think we've heard it time and again, but it can't be stressed enough. Obviously, people in Gaza are going through an unbelievably horrific, stressful, devastating time, but we keep in our thoughts everyone, including you, Siwar, who is outside Gaza, who has family there, and just the desperate worry and concern all the time, 24 hours a day, is something that I'm sure is weighing very, very heavily. And we keep you in our thoughts, and we hope that you will be reunited with your family soon in much better circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siwar. And we really, again, appreciate all the work that you do and all of these stories that you've been contributing to the Electronic Intifada. They are just incredibly valuable, and we really are grateful for your work. Thank you so much, Siwar.
Thank you too.
This is the Electronic Intifada live stream for Thursday, December 7th. Before we go to Ahmed As-Samak in a few minutes, Ali, I know we wanted to talk a little bit about our friends and colleagues in Gaza right now, and also some news reports about mass arrests. You say.
Yes, Nora, I just wanted to say, I know that many people are concerned about our friends and colleagues in Gaza. I'm getting questions from people about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who we've had on the show many times and who does such important work, and our friend Ahmed 𝐓𝐡𝐞. And unfortunately, we haven't heard from them for several days. And that's true with a number of people in Gaza. I will say that they were both very clear with us that access to the internet is now extremely difficult. Mobile phone networks are down. And another one of our colleagues in Gaza, Ahmed Dreimli, did manage to get a message to me yesterday, and he explained that you don't have internet the vast majority of the time, or it's not safe to go out and look for it. But then even if you do get internet, the other problem is that it is so difficult for anyone to charge their devices. So in one sense, that's comforting, because we hope that the silence is just because of the difficulty of connecting and not something worse. But on the other hand, it is extremely worrying that we're not hearing from our friends and colleagues. And it's in that context that the reports that are coming out of Gaza now of mass arrests in the north of Gaza, and some of the human rights activists have circulated photos showing mass roundups of Palestinian men, civilians, in the north of Gaza, that Israel is binding, stripping of their clothes. I'm going to show you this photo. I'm going to drop this in our chat here, and Tamara, the ever brilliant Tamara Nassar behind the scenes, could hopefully display this tweet, which is published by the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Group, and it shows men bound and gagged, a large number of men bound and gagged, who were taken from UNRWA shelters. And there is also a fear, some people, including Rami Abdu of the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Group. Rami is a longtime human rights defender. I actually met him in Gaza 10 years ago. He's now in Istanbul, but of course, his organization maintains contact with a lot of people in Gaza, and he's raising the possibility that there may well be mass executions as part of this genocide. And these images, and there are others similar to them, of men being rounded up and put in trucks, certainly raise, in my mind, they remind me of the pictures or the events that happened in Srebrenica in Bosnia in the 1990s, where there was a genocide. And of course, with no one there to be able to see what's happening, really anything can happen. So it's extremely, extremely worrying. And so this is just to say that we are constantly trying to stay connected with our friends and colleagues in Gaza. I'm happy to say we are in touch with some of them. And when there's any significant news, we will report it and let you know. But I just want to say thank you to everyone who's asking about 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and Ahmed 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and others. We're making constant efforts to try and stay connected with them.
Yeah, it is extremely worrying. For the next 10 minutes, I wanted to get John's analysis of what we're seeing in terms of the ground operations, especially in the south of the Gaza Strip, where, Israel has told people to evacuate, saying that it's for their safety, and then invading the south, besieging it, and carpet bombing. And then we'll take a break, and we'll have our contributor Ahmed 𝐓𝐡𝐞 join us, and then come back for more analysis. But first, just briefly, John, what can you tell us about the nature of the ground invasion, especially what's going on in the south?
Yeah, Israel's moved its focus to the south after the humanitarian prisoner exchange and pause, and the level of fighting is intense right now in the south. It's intense all over the Gaza Strip. Of course, the airstrikes underpin everything that's happening. Nowhere safe for anybody. The war in the north continues, but really the focus right now for Israel is on the south. And I think that there's, the necessity for Israel to have some sort of, spectacle of victory or accomplishment, something that they can show for what they've done in the humanitarian realm that we've been talking about, the devastation and horror. To what end? And so I think Khan Yunis for them was a necessary target. It's the home of Mohammed, the head of the Qassam Brigades, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who's the head of Hamas's Politburo, but who is also a founding member of the Qassam Brigades. So I think there's a propaganda value to some of this. I mean, we saw Netanyahu yesterday say that they had encircled the house of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. And then everybody in the media in the West repeated it. I heard it on the BBC and CBC here in Canada. There's no evidence of that at this point.
As though 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 would be just waiting for them in his living room.
Well, Sinwar is actually an interesting guy because last time they destroyed his house, he took a great photo. I guess that was last year's war, and he took a photo sitting in his chair with a big smile on his face. Not a guy you see smiling a lot. And then after he gave that speech at the stadium at the end of the war, he said he was going to walk home. So if Israel wanted to assassinate him, that he would be walking for the next 45 minutes to his house, and he did that. So I think this is, part of the disconnect between what's going on on the ground and the sort of propaganda war, where you just say, we're trying to get we're trying to kill the leader, as if that's, as if that would justify this war that has targeted civilians. And you can see by that picture, thanks Tamara, you can see by that picture, he doesn't care what you do to his house. This is a war for liberation, and nobody has been more clear about that articulation than 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, that Palestinians aren't going to just be silent in the face of their genocide, which before October 7th was slow and steady. And of course, since October 7th has been accelerated and very public, but it's the same dynamic. And these kind of shows of, these kind of spectacles, they don't have any impact on the ground. They don't have any impact of the war that they're actually fighting. People don't take it seriously. And 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 has given lots of opportunities to prove that he does not care about this kind of, encircling his house. Although it's worth noting that part of being a resistance leader in Palestine is expecting that your family will be killed, and your extended family will be killed, but not you. Your home will be targeted with the civilians inside it. So this idea that they're encircling his house as if there's a tunnel under there that he's just hanging out in, it's just propaganda. When meanwhile, the ferocity of the armed struggle that's happening in the south, which makes sense, is the focus right now for the resistance. Although the resistance is all over the north as well, of course. It's focused in the south, and you can see by their reports that the fighting is fierce in Khan Yunis right now. And Qassam Brigades are basically saying, and have been saying for about a week now, that they're taking out an armored vehicle per hour, essentially in this fight. And so Israel had some time during the ceasefire, during the pause. I mean, it's weird to call it a ceasefire, but during the prisoner exchange, both sides needed that, but Israel needed it in particular to, recruit their damaged vehicles, to fix their field vehicles, and that kind of thing, to prepare it for the fight in the south, which is being set up at this point in the same language that Israel said in the north. They've said Khan Yunis is the number 2 �𝐤𝐿 battalion to be targeted after presumably Shujaiya and Jabalia, which is still fighting fiercely now 60 plus days on into the war. So there's certain things that Israel has to accomplish before they can wind up their war with some kind of achievements. And so Khan Yunis is one of those. And of course, it's just, as Suar said, it's just brutal what's happening. Israel, of course, we covered for the previous 60 days, told everybody to go south. So Israel pushed everybody into this area that they're now attacking, and they don't allow people to go back north to their homes. So people aren't able to flee in the other direction back to the north. So everybody is cramped in this tiny corner of the already tiny and encircled Gaza Strip with no way out. Nowhere is safe. I mean, we can see footage because people have their phones in these UN schools, and we can see the airstrikes all around these schools, and the ground forces have just begun. So this part of the war has really just begun, and I think we all are afraid of what that means. To fight a war, to direct your army to this tiny parcel of land that's just crowded with so many people. And it's just the algorithm of massacres where people started with their families and moved. And so they started at 10, and then they went to another family member, and they became 20, and then 20 to the next, to 40. And that's why we're seeing these brutal massacres now, 4 generations of families, multiple families in the same buildings. And Israel's dropping these buildings on top of entire families that are trying to, went to the south on orders, life and death orders, and are now being attacked where they said the safe zones were. So, we'll talk more later in the show about the accomplishments of the resistance, but I think just from the humanitarian perspective, this is setting up to be a disaster. And we've talked about it before. Is like, what is the number that Israel's allowed to massacre in a tantrum to make up for October 7th, when their Gaza division was crushed and taken underground in Gaza?
Yeah. And after we hear from our friend Ahmed Al-Samak, we're going to come back to you, John, to talk specifically about the gains of the Palestinian resistance groups. And we're also going to be watching some jelly beans, we're calling them. So please stick around. But for just the next few minutes, if you could talk about these allegations that Israel is trying to flood the tunnel network under Gaza with seawater. We saw yesterday some images being passed around on social media of a group of Israeli soldiers with what looked like a giant hose or pipe connected to the beach, the sea at the beach, ostensibly being fed into some tunnel. I mean, it didn't look very engineering, like very structurally engineered, but this is what we're seeing on social media. Talk about the veracity of these claims and what your analysis is of that.
Right. So Israel is saying that essentially they've got these 5 pumps on the beach north of the Shati camp on the northwest edge of Gaza. And they have these pumps that they're going to flood the tunnels with seawater, which is just, I think we've talked about this previously on these live streams. And I know we talked about the attempt to gas them. A lot of this shows, I think, more than whether it can be done, it shows that Israel is really searching for any alternative besides actually fighting in these tunnels. So the first thing to note, of course, which the captives who were released and who met with Netanyahu the other day mentioned, Israel's people are all in these tunnels. So that's first and foremost. The captives who met with Netanyahu, I guess rightfully so, freaked out about this plan because if it were to work, the result would be to kill all of their soldiers, more than 100 captives that are still held in Gaza. So right away, it's already a suspect idea, because were it to work, I'm not sure that that would be something that Israel would be advantageous for Israel. But let's just really talk about the tunnels. There's 1,300 of them, according to the Israelis. There's 500 kilometers of them. It would take millions of cubic meters to pump through these pumps. So even if it did work, it presumes that you have months to carry out this operation. It presumes that Israel knows where the tunnels are in the first place, which we know is not true. They don't know the difference between an offensive tunnel, a defensive tunnel, a logistics tunnel. And none of us do, for the record, although a few Israelis now do. They know better than anybody, and nobody else really knows. So there's a lot in that Wall Street Journal article that we just showed there. To be fair to the experts in that article, they all said the same thing. We don't know. We've never dealt with something like this. Historically, there's been nothing on this scale. It's a massive engineering project for people in Gaza, and any historical example of tunnels has enough differences, distinctions that would make those historical examples not as relevant. Like the Americans tried to flood tunnels in Vietnam. The Vietnamese tunnels weren't as deep as these tunnels in Gaza. They weren't as well the concrete sided like we know that they are in Gaza. We've seen documentaries from inside the tunnels that show completely encased concrete tunnels, not just the ones that we see on these videos that the Israelis have showed that show sort of prefab concrete. We've seen tunnels that are completely encased. So it's not clear that that's even possible for Israel to do. It also presumes that the Palestinians themselves haven't already thought of this, which is a massive engineering accomplishment to dig these tunnels. And the most important engineering aspect of the tunnels, for people who are familiar with Gaza and its sandy soil, is that over the years they have collapsed. So the Palestinians are very well aware of what makes the tunnels collapse. And so pumping the tunnels is part of the apparatus of the engineering of the tunnels. Furthermore, as we know from Israel, from the tunnel that they accidentally found that was 70 meters deep, that's as much as 50 meters below the water table. So it already presumes that you're pumping below the water table. But really, we're getting into territory that we just don't know the answer. It presumes, for one thing, that the tunnels are all connected. It presumes that your entrance at 𝐓𝐡𝐞 camp somehow connects to the entire system, and that you could then spend months filling up the entire system, sort of like a cartoon. But the devastation that comes from it is well known. If you pump salt water into the aquifer, you're going to make Gaza essentially unlivable. And I think Ali talked on the show before about a paper he wrote about the aquifer. It's already a very dangerous situation for that aquifer, under significant stress that I can remember when I lived in Gaza. The United Nations was saying that Gaza was going to be unlivable by 2020, in part because of the collapse of the water table and the inability to keep up with desalinization imperatives that come from having the sea be right beside you, which is, again, we don't know how the sea would impact these. Will it collapse the surface layer? Does it create instability throughout the entire Gaza Strip through the rebuilding process? We don't know the answer to any of these questions, and the Israelis don't either, which is why they didn't begin by saying, we're going to flood the tunnels, because their own experts don't believe that flooding the tunnels will work because of the size, because they don't know, the Israelis don't know if the tunnel network is even connected. it's possible they go in and they find an offensive tunnel in Shati, and they pump and take photos of it and have a spectacle of flooding the tunnels, because they can't get out of this war without saying they dealt with the tunnels. Because unlike before October 6th, October 6th and before, a lot of people in the world didn't know there was a massive underground tunnel network in the Gaza Strip. But everybody knows now. So there's no pretense that Israel can withdraw from Gaza in any kind of pretense of victory without saying that they somehow dealt with the tunnels. And so that's, I think, what we're dealing with more here, like a psychological operation, a propaganda victory.
And John, I really do think there's a lot to that, because the image that the tweet we showed earlier showing that photo on the beach of them supposedly pumping seawater into holes, right, that one, that is posted by Aviva Klompas, who there's no reason people should recognize that name, but she is a former, I think her official bio is that she's a former speechwriter at the UN, at Israel's mission at the United Nations, but she seems to be a conduit for official propaganda. In other words, even though she doesn't have a formal role now, she and a couple of other accounts I've noticed seem to get these propaganda images passed to them from Israeli authorities, and then they put it out as if they're just sort of journalists or civilians or whatever it is, to try to remove the official fingerprints from this propaganda. So I think the fact that this is being shared by an account like this is really more about giving the image of victory, because if you've pumped, they're pumping seawater. I don't know if it's possible to zoom in further, but it's like they're pumping seawater into the beach, into the sandy beach. Is that what they're doing? I mean, if you've ever dumped water into sandy soil, you know that water just dissipates down into the sandy soil or to the aquifer. So I don't even know the idea that they have there at the end of that hose an entrance that leads them to the whole tunnel network is absolutely ridiculous, and that you could just flood a sandy beach and that's somehow going to help you. So to me, this really looks like a psyop or propaganda for international consumption and possibly for Israeli domestic consumption. And now I'm just noticing all the Israeli soldiers over there by the shore. I don't know what they're doing, if they're just taking a walk on the beach or...
I had the same thought just now. Yeah.
Or what.
What are they
But
doing?
It's a logistical nightmare what's happening here. This cannot be a months-long process.
And that's the other thing. I mean, they're posting this photo. This does not show how much water. Look at that little hose they've got there. I mean, it's big for a hose, but how much water would you have to pump? And how long would it take to make any significant difference, especially if you're pumping it into sand, where it's just going to drain back towards the sea? So if this is what they're trying to sell to people, it's not doing the trick.
But you could see, Alia, that they've come out of this prisoner exchange ceasefire with a whole new, it's like they got their focus groups fired up during the 7-day break, and they've come back to answer the sort of questions that people had. Like, how can you say you're winning if you haven't touched a tunnel and you're too scared to go down a tunnel? You won't even go into a tunnel under Shifa, where you said your people are. And there was no booby traps. And all these other tunnels that they say that they're shutting down. So they say they've closed 500 tunnels. What's the connection between closing those tunnels and where your people are? The presumption is that you've closed off the exits to the tunnels. On the one side of their propaganda, they're saying we're closing off all of these entrances. And then on the other side of their propaganda, they're saying that they're going to flood the tunnels to the top. Where are their people going to go? And it's like they rolled this story out in, like, what is it, the 7th? I think that Wall Street Journal story, was from the 5th, 6th, or 7th of December. They've been in that area north of Shati along the beach for weeks. So they could have been 4 weeks into their brilliant engineering project to pump water into the Gaza tunnels. But that wasn't on their radar for the first half of the war. And then they come out of their ceasefire pause, and they have a completely different push on their propaganda. Now they're dealing with the tunnels. Now they're dealing with Sinwar. Now they're talking about their own soldiers, because they previously, as we've talked about, didn't talk about what their soldiers were doing. There was no stories of like heroic soldiers. Well, they came out of the pause, and now they're talking about their soldiers fighting close quarters combat, associating some of the deaths even with fighting, fierce fighting, close quarters, that they're winning. So it almost looks like during the pause, they saw their focus groups, and their focus groups said, you have to deal with the leadership, you have to deal with the tunnels, you have to show us to be heroes because you're hiding your deaths. And part of hiding your deaths is that you're taking away from your own people any of spectacles of victory.
And
like, I don't want to
well
predict, but the day after the war, _Qassam is going to have a parade where there's tens of thousands of fighters. So how is Israel going to have this victory after this genocide that they've carried out when they hit their magic number for Blinken? What is it, 50,000 people? You get to kill 50,000 people, but show no military victories for 4 divisions of your army being deployed inside the Gaza Strip, a war that you've been planning for decades. I think a lot of this it's psyops. It's a lot of it is propaganda.
And I think that also relates to the photos we looked at earlier of these civilian men taken from UN shelters. These horrifying images is to create an image of, because of course Israel is going to claim and is going to market these photos to its own people that these are Hamas militants who've either been captured or surrendered, and that is not the case at all.
No, they're already saying that. They're saying they got them from tunnels, which is just patently false.
It's a lie, because they wouldn't have come out of the tunnels, and we know the Israelis aren't going in, and there's nowhere that you're going to get that many people, that many fighters gathering together in one place in a combat zone. These are very small cells that move around very furtively, as we're going to see when we look at some more of the videos later. And we know that these are people who are being abducted from UN shelters, or when people are trying to move south. And but again, this is about creating a spectacle by which Israel can claim that it is winning, that it's dominating, that it's teaching those barbarians, those savages, a lesson by stripping them down, by blindfolding them, by humiliating them in this manner. But I don't know that it has that effect, except perhaps with the Israeli public. I think a lot of people look at this and they just see more images of brutal domination and horror. I don't know that this really impresses anyone who isn't already firmly on Israel's side.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that looks like Jenin. When I lived in Jenin, and they would arrest everybody, they would tell all the men between 17 and 35 to show up at the schoolyard, or that kind of thing, and mass arrests. That looks like the Israel that we know very well, and people in Gaza know from decades of occupation really well. The thing that they've really done this time is dial up the technological massacres, but that kind of picture right there, I think people in Gaza, maybe not on that large a scale, but that's the sort of photo that goes back to the beginnings of the Israeli occupation. And I think, what Rami Abdo said is the concern. I think people are concerned that that's the stages before a massacre that they've seen before. These photos are very disturbing. This photo is a horrific photo, and then there's another one showing truckloads of people. These guys are then put in trucks and shipped off to where, and who knows where they are? It's just such a brutal situation.
Yeah,
it's criminal.
It is. We are gonna pause on this conversation for a minute. We wanted to bring on our good friend Ahmed Assamak. He is a contributor to the Electronic Intifada. He is currently an MBA student in Dublin, Ireland, and he previously worked as a journalist in Gaza, where he grew up. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining us again on the Electronic Intifada live stream. How are you doing?
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me for the second time. I'm good, thank you. How about you?
I don't know the answer to that question.
We're happy to see you, Ahmed.
We are happy to see you. Can you give us a sense of... Thank you. Can you give us a sense of what you're hearing from your family, if you're able to connect with them at all, what the situation is for them and for your friends and neighbors and community members in Gaza?
Unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse, especially after the occupation has launched another ground invasion in the south after they ordered 1.1 million people from Gaza City and the northern strip to go to the south. It's really heartbreaking. Last week, I've lost my uncle. He was sleeping. He just was sleeping, and then they bombed his flat. He's a father of six children. The oldest daughter is, I guess, 17 or 18. Their mother passed away a few years ago, and now their father was killed last week, and now they are orphans, as thousands of children in Gaza. I don't know what should I say in such a situation. 2 weeks ago, before storming Shifa hospital, they also bombed my other uncle in Gaza. Before bombing his house, my uncle evacuated to the in the middle of the strip, and he told his family, I would go there to find a place to shelter in, and then I will call you to come back after me. And then he went there. He went to the south, or in the middle of the strip, which is the south of the Gaza Valley, with his son. After 2 days, his sons and daughters were supposed also to evacuate to the south, but Israel bombed them, killing 2 of them, Mohammed and his wife, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, and wounding many children, I guess 5 or 4 of them. And my other cousins also were severely injured. After like a few days in hospital, before storming the hospital, maybe in 2 days or something like that, one of them evacuated to the south. He had to. He was injured, but he had to evacuate and to walk more than 10 kilometers on foot because there weren't any taxis or any cars. So on the Israeli military cross point on Salah ad-Din Street, they kidnapped him. They arrested him. He was injured. He just was like a 22-year-old. He's completely civilian. He didn't do anything wrong in his life. He's just a man who works as a vendor he has no military or political interests. I don't know why they arrested him. They brutally tortured him for 9 days in Asqalan or Ashkelon prison, and then he was along with, I guess, 20 or 30 Gazans, and then they released him on Karam Abu Salim crossing point in Rafah in the south. And before releasing them, the Israeli soldiers were shooting on the ground near to them to push them and to make them just run. And he told me, Ahmed, they were like playing with us or just shooting on us, near us, and they were laughing. The point is, my uncle couldn't hug his killed son for the last time before burying him or his wife. Like when we are talking about killing people, sometimes I feel like ashamed when I want to talk about my damaged house. And this is for the third time. They bombed an adjoining house to us. Our neighbors, they are from Abu Shusha or Abu Saud. They have two names. They were completely civilians. I don't know why they killed them. They dropped a 1-ton bomb on them, and they destroyed a 3-story house on them, killing 10 people. And they have been under the rubble like for maybe 10 days or 2 weeks ago, and no one can pull them up. Our house was significantly damaged. When my family, during the temporary truce, went to our house to check and to take what remained, like from our clothes and this stuff, my brother Mohammed told me they had found a lot of flesh and some parts from our neighbor's body in our house. Just and I was talking 3 days ago with my mom, and she told me we are thinking of like we want to just to escape from all that, but we didn't find any place. After the Israeli ground invasion to the south, they ordered people to go to Rafah, from Khan Yunis to Rafah, or to Deir al-Balah, which is a camp in the middle of the strip. And my family was like, my mom told me they wanted to evacuate there, but I told them, no, don't go there, because they also are committing massacres there, and they still where they are now. The point is, now they don't have. My family has run of gas cylinders or cooking gas, so they have to find woods or for fire to cook. And they told me we can't find any shop or wood shops or in any woods. Like my brothers go every day just walking on the streets to find cartons or woods from the streets and take them for fires. And then they told me, like, Ahmed, we stopped like even finding woods and cartons on the streets. All people are looking for woods and cartons. So they had to go to my house, as all our beds, cupboards, doors were smashed and broken due to the bombing. They took the broken all the wood of the broken wooden stuff to set a fire to cook. Just imagine. And yesterday he just sent me a photo of what remains of my bed, and he told me, look, we are using it to cook, for fire to cook. Just imagine. Before traveling to Dublin, I was talking to my mom about getting married, and I just spared some time for marriage because marriage in Gaza is a little. Marriage costs in Gaza are high. Like it costs like maybe $10,000. And I was talking with my mom about this, and now it's almost impossible to get married now because we have to use the all money I spared for marriage to repair the house, because there isn't any words up to date about compensations or about rebuilding the money funding to rebuild Gaza. And again, when I'm talking about this, like I feel I feel ashamed a little bit to talk about the financial losses in front of killing people and losing friends and losing relatives and uncles. I'm at loss of words. I don't know what should I say. I don't know.
It just, the scare. I'm just thinking as I'm listening to you, Mohammed, Ahmed, I'm thinking of the video we watched earlier from our colleague Mohammed Ashad in Gaza, where he said, we played a short video earlier before you joined us, where he said that people don't even have time to mourn for the dead. And we've heard that from so many people because it is a matter of survival now. People are just trying to get through one day at a time. And when you're trying to get through one day at a time, you do have to think about finding wood to cook. Unbelievably, in the 23rd, in the year 2023, that people are forced to look for wood in order to cook. You do have to worry about shelter. You have to think about those things. And I think that the fact that you're even thinking about repairing your house, to me, is a sign that you see a future, that you see something in the future, that you see hope, that you're thinking about the future. And I don't think that's something to be ashamed of, Ahmed. I think that as long as we're thinking about a future, then we maintain our hope and we maintain our faith that there will be something to return to and to rebuild. So I think you should think about it in that positive way. And I don't think we as humans are capable of understanding or comprehending this level of loss, where so many people, we don't know anyone in Gaza, Ahmed, who hasn't lost dozens of friends and family, dozens. They've killed at this point 1 in every 100 people in Gaza, 1 in every 100 people. And so I think it's going to take years and years for us to even begin to understand the scale of the loss. But in the meantime, we have to maintain our hope for the future.
I think Ahmed's internet connection was unstable and it looks like he dropped off. We'll try to get him back on. But I think that's exactly right. I think that I don't think that we're psychologically capable of understanding the breadth of this kind of catastrophe and nightmare. And, that's for us watching it happen. It's unimaginable, the exponential, weight of all of that on the people in Gaza right now living it. Ahmed, you're back. what else can we say? What, when you think about the future in a liberated Palestine, what are you thinking about? Ahmed, can you hear us? Oh, maybe he can't hear us. Okay, we'll try to get him back. But that's a big question that I think a lot of people are talking about now. And it has to do with like reclaiming the humanity and really embodying that liberation struggle that everyone is working toward. So hopefully we can get him back on to talk about that. But in the meantime, let's talk about the resistance. John, what can we say about some of the new jelly beans that we've been seeing? What do they tell us about how the Palestinian resistance operations are going?
So I think we're going to take the banning gamble, and show a couple of videos here. What happened this week? I think these videos are worth
risking our. We should just say, I think it's important for viewers and listeners to know that we do not have free speech on this platform. We have had several of our videos summarily removed by this video platform, and we've appealed those removals, and they haven't come back. And we know that all of these big tech companies are working hand in hand to censor what they claim is misinformation or disinformation, but which is actually the truth. The more you tell the truth on these platforms, the more likely you are to be banned. That said, we're going to hand it to John to take us through a video and hope that at least our live viewers will see. I'll just say this. Of course, we're recording this, and what we'll be able to do if they do nuke our live stream afterwards is we will have the separate segments, and we will be able to put them up. So you'll still be able to hear the discussion with Siwar or with Ahmed or some of the other stuff we've done. But we think it's worth it. So let's go.
Okay, so this is from Shujaiya. The Israelis haven't gone into Shujaiya yet. They've avoided it. It's their they have nightmares about this place from 2014. And just by looking, we can see that they're able to move from building to building. They're within feet firing these Yassins that we've talked about, Palestinian produced warheads. And there's a burning Israeli armored personnel carrier, which previously we hadn't seen. We've seen a lot of strikes of these weapons, but we haven't seen the aftermath, in part because people have had to leave the scene. And so here you can see in this moment that the spotter actually tells him he's about to shoot because they can hear the armored vehicles moving down the road, and he's about to shoot. And the spotter says, no, wait, that's a bulldozer. It's not an armored personnel carrier carrying 13 soldiers or a tank carrying 3 to 5. It's a bulldozer with one person in it. So presumably they're picking their targets. They have the ability to have spotters in these buildings and are picking their targets. In Shujaiya, which is where, you can almost touch the vehicle from there. And of course, these videos don't match with the Israeli casualty reports that come out of Gaza, which has been something that we don't know the answer to. We're analyzing this in real time. We don't have access to the fighters right now. I'm sure there's going to be a decade of documentaries that tell us these stories. But this is 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. The fighters clearly have the ability 60 days into the war to move between buildings, to hit point blank like this.
And John, the interesting
And then this part, Ali, just let me say this part,
Yeah.
that's their fighters right there saying this is for Wissam Farhat, who we talked about on the show on Monday, who's the 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 battalion commander that was assassinated by the Israelis just as the prisoner exchange, which presumably he was very involved in, was taking place. And so we actually haven't heard from Qassam that Farhat was assassinated. We've only heard from the Israelis. And now this appears to be confirmation in the most spectacular fashion. Basically, within less than 72 hours, he was killed on Monday in Palestine, Sunday night here. And we're seeing their fighters posing outside of the burning vehicle and saying this is for Wissam Farhat. And just if you weren't with us on Monday on the show, I discussed him as an example, the battalion commander in 𝐄𝐥𝐜, who's basically his career marks the trajectory of the rise of the Qassam brigades from a guerrilla movement to basically a formal army that we're watching, and we've been watching for the last 60 days. He's been the 𝐄𝐥𝐜 battalion commander, which is the most formidable, according to the Israelis, the most formidable Qassam formation. And they're the ones who were responsible for the 𝐄𝐥𝐜, the Battle of 𝐄𝐥𝐜, which the Israelis in 2014 all but ended the ground invasion. They moved in from the east. 𝐄𝐥𝐜 is on the far east side of Gaza City. So it's the first thing that you encounter if you come from the east to invade westward into Gaza. And so 𝐄𝐥𝐜 was where their forces went in and were attacked by a 360-degree ambush using tunnels, using buildings. The Israelis believed, according to their soldiers who testified after, that they believed that they were going to have 600 dead soldiers if they didn't withdraw, and which they did. The Israelis withdrew under shell fire, and it was one of the most brutal massacres in the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict up until the last 60 days. But a very important battalion commander, 𝐄𝐥𝐜, he was in charge of that battle, but also on the other side of the border, he was in charge of the Nahal Oz attack, where Palestinian Qassam fighters used tunnels to come up and overrun an Israeli base and attempt to capture soldiers in 2014. And also he was part of the October 7th attack. And so we haven't heard from Qassam that he was assassinated. And then we get within 72 hours this footage of a burning Israeli armored personnel carrier. So that's a personnel carrier. That's not a tank. You can see the mounted machine gun on top of it that indicates that it's a troop carrier. So we're not clear what happened, where the soldiers are. It's clear that those fighters had a position right there. So it doesn't appear there was any evacuation happening. And that's why in that earlier in the clip, it's interesting to see that we see the spotter say the vehicles are coming. And then he says, don't shoot, it's a bulldozer. Let's wait and hit the armored personnel. See him put his arm down there? He's about to shoot, and the spotter says, don't do it, it's a bulldozer. And so we discussed this previously on live streams, but they operate in units, usually sets of two, armored personnel carrier and a tank, and then the bulldozer is leading the way. This is the beginnings of the invasion in 𝐄𝐥𝐜, because the Israelis have avoided 𝐄𝐥𝐜 because of the ghosts of 𝐄𝐥𝐜, and also, according to some Israeli sources, that they believed that that's who would have the prisoners. That's who would have the Israeli prisoners. And so they were involved in the prisoner exchange, and don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but that's what happened in 2014 as well. The Qassam leaders who negotiated the ceasefire were then assassinated by Israel as soon as the ceasefire ended, presumably using information that was derived from those negotiations. And I think we talked about with the prisoner exchange, that the prisoner exchange that happened last week was significantly, was very risky logistically to be involved and to be nimble and to be picking who's on which list and whatnot, is a vulnerability for the Palestinian resistance. And they've been unable to reach Farhat for the 13 years that he's been battalion commander of the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 battalion. And before that, when he was part of the rocket program that developed the Qassam rocket from a short range rocket to one that can touch almost anywhere in historic Palestine. And so we don't know, we're putting these pieces together for our listeners, because we don't know. Qassam hasn't acknowledged his death. I suppose that's what they just spectacularly did in that video. But there's nothing that says we did this for Farhat. That's just a little tiny piece that you hear him, the fighter, saying in that video. It wasn't focused on beyond the fact that
this is their daily work. This is all in a day's work for them.
It's all in a day's work, and it's being turned around within. So they're not holding these videos for weeks and showing the best ofs. This is a direct response to his assassination on Sunday night, and by Wednesday morning, we're getting videos of them taking out armored personnel carriers and the personnel carriers in flames right in front of the position that these fighters have. 60 days into the war, they have complete freedom of movement in these areas that, some of these international monitors, war monitors that are making these maps of where Israel is operating or where they control. And it's just clearly, they have the longer this war goes on, the more capacity the resistance has, not less. They're still able to fire rockets at the same rate. We can see from their field reports that there's more action today. They're using more Yassins. They're firing more rockets, both made indigenously. So we don't even know this. This is another thing we don't know. We don't know how many rockets they have. We don't know how many Yassins they have. But everything that we've shown is that despite this brutal massacre and targeting of civilians, that the resistance is still capable of functioning and answering something. Because the Farhat thing, where I got the original information was from the Israelis, because the Israelis were very excited about getting him. Because basically this is, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 2014 was the kind of battle that redefined the Israeli army. It redefined their armored vehicles because they no longer could go into urban areas in their old armored vehicles. They needed to rush these Namr heavily armored personnel carriers into action because they said the previous ones weren't good enough. And then we see these brand new, beautiful vehicles that Israel, talked about for a decade in combat action in flames.
And they probably still have that new car smell to them. But one thing I wanted to show, Tamara, if we can show that last tweet I sent you, the most recent one I sent you that I thought was very funny, which includes the screenshot from the video we just watched. And I thought this was a very clever thing somebody did, comparing the Israeli or this video that we just watched with the Israeli propaganda, and I just thought this was very funny. Of course, on the left you see the still we just saw of the Qassam fighter posing in front of the burning Israeli vehicle, and on the right we see Daniel Hagari, the Israeli military spokesperson, in the basement of the Rantisi hospital a few weeks ago, pointing at the wall calendar and claiming falsely that it shows the names of Hamas fighters. So that's just an example of how these things are playing on social media. That the Qassam videos giving a lot of credibility to what the resistance is saying, because the resistance will put out on their Telegram channel, they will say, today we did this, we did that, the other, we attacked a tank here, we attacked an armored personnel carrier there. And then invariably the next day or a day or two later, they will post video showing that that's exactly what they did. So that there's a high degree of credibility. And I think something that struck me, John, about the video we just watched that is significant, because as we've noted in the previous videos over the last 60 days, you do sometimes see a clear hit of the Israeli tank or the Israeli armored vehicle, but often you don't. Often it's not very clear. And the reason, as you explained, is because they have to get out of there. They fire their shot and they have to move, because the return fire presumably can come within seconds. This time, for whatever reason, this, perhaps because of the positions they were in, they were able to show the burning armored vehicles with a clarity we hadn't seen before. And the other thing I noticed, because sometimes people will say, well, you know, maybe these explosions are just the shell hitting the outside of the vehicle. But in this video, we saw very clear secondary explosions. Very clear and big secondary explosions. And what are the secondary explosions? That's when you hit the armored vehicle or the tank, and the ammunition that's inside that vehicle, because these are, of course, fighting vehicles, they're carrying shells or they're carrying large amounts of ammunition, that explodes. And that's when you get the secondary explosion. And I think we see several very clear secondary explosions in this video, John, if I'm correct. So we can assume that that is what's happening in a lot of the other cases where we don't necessarily see it, because the fighter has to get out of there. You know, if they're standing in a street, sometimes we see them going around the corner and they're standing exposed in the street. They fire their shot. They're not going to stand around waiting to take photos or take video of what happens. They're going to fire and get out of there. And we're lucky to see anything that we do see. So I don't know, John, if you want to say more about that, but I wanted to talk about some of the impact I think this is having on Israeli psychology and Israeli propaganda. But, you know, you may have more that you want to tell us about this before we do that.
Well, we have another round of jelly beans too.
Okay. All right. Well, let's
this other one that predated this one, that showed Qassam, that showed an Israeli camp, presumably that they had set up, believing that they were safe, and they tilled the topsoil. We've seen a lot of IDF videos when they take over the area, bomb the houses, and then they're tilling the soil essentially with their bulldozers, because they're so paranoid about underground explosives and tunnels. And they show in this video from earlier in the week, they actually come up from the ground with presumably some sort of periscope inside the Israeli camp, using the tunnel to access. Again, we don't know. We're speculating on this stuff. We'll have to catch the documentaries that come out over the next decade, because these fighters all have incredible stories to tell.
But this video, John, this came out, was it yesterday or the day before? The last couple of days. But prior to that, Qassam had issued a statement saying that they did this, and saying that they, maybe people already know, but maybe you want to tell the story. We don't see everything they say they did in the video, but what we see in the video gives a huge amount of credibility to what they say they did. Maybe you want to talk us through it.
Yeah, so they said, this is the thing again, that the longer the Israelis are there inside Gaza, the more capacity the resistance has to hit them, not less. And so this is a camp that the Israelis believe that they're safe in, and this camera comes up. These are Israeli army positions. So you could see in each of these tents, and that sand around the outside has been plowed, bulldozed to create berms. So this is inside, they believe, their safe zone inside Gaza. And what 𝐶 is showing here is that they clearly have the ability to penetrate inside the Israeli camps. So again, these videos are just tips of the iceberg of what's going on, because did they have all the periscopes have cameras? Do all the fighters have GoPros? No, these are just suggesting what is happening all over the Gaza Strip. And so on the weekend, 𝐶 told us, usually their field reports are very specific and limited, but on the weekend, I don't know if their editor was away or what, but they produced this multiple paragraph story that described them monitoring the enemy's camp and then setting it up to place explosives in a circle around the camp. And they described detonating the explosives and then fighters emerging from tunnels to attack in a complex attack. You set off the initial stage, the soldiers scatter, you attack the soldiers that scatter, and then you fire artillery mortars to protect the fighters so that they can withdraw back into the tunnel and get home safely. So the fighters are returning home safely. And yeah, we joked about it in our meeting that somebody had a really amazing story to tell by the basis of this story, because 𝐶 says one mujahideen advances as the Israelis are scattering. And you read that, and when we read, I was cautious of that one, because it was like, this almost seems like it's almost too much. It's impossible to sort of imagine this happening. And then 𝐶, a couple days later, puts out a video that shows that not only was that possible, but that would be the least that would happen in that circumstance. If you have an attack tunnel underneath an Israeli position, that tunnel can itself become a bomb. And so that is, again, happening at all of these camps. And the longer Israel stays in these camps, the more capacity the resistance has to hit them, not less. And so the longer this goes on, and we need to keep both of these parts in it, that Israel needs to show a victory, but also they cannot remain in the places that they're saying that they're getting their victories from, because they will get defeated. And so there's a balance between how Israel withdraws from this conflict with the specter of victory for their own people, and the realities of the continuing guerrilla war, putting Palestinians in a better position to resist, not in a worse position. And so when you see the capacity to use, I mean, Israel probably prepared that space for multiple days before they moved their troops safely in there. So do the questions that video raises are, is that position already there, or did they actually dig it? Because they can dig attack tunnels fast enough to actually react to where the camp is set up. But also, there's such a tunnel network underneath Gaza that there's no way the Israelis can know, because they don't know. They haven't mapped the tunnels. And as we know, the tunnels are a spider web. So even mapping them, it's not clear how you would even do that unless you had the overall map. So again, it's a video. There's nothing in that video. You don't see anyone killed in the video. There's no reason to have that video taken off air. It's much more interesting and creative than what the Israelis show in their videos that CNN will loop. CNN will take the day's worth of IDF videos and stitch them together and play them on loop for their audience. Airstrikes that kill, dropping buildings. They'll say this is an airstrike in Shujaiya, and they're showing something that we've seen from the United Nations reports or from hospital reports, killed 50 people, killed 4 generations of a family. And they're showing it on loop on CNN, and that's perfectly fine. But if we show a video of a periscope coming up through the ground and looking at the Israelis, they'll take your whole 2-hour show off the air.
And also, CNN is not showing any of this. It's not, this is not appearing in mainstream Western media, which is part of the propaganda to diminish the military achievements of the resistance and the military nature of this conflict, which from the very beginning, as Asa said, was an attack on the Israeli military primarily, although they did attack the settlements, which are themselves militarized encampments along the border, and Israel's propaganda effort to claim that this was, mass rapes and just an attack on civilians for the sake of bloodshed, because these videos show how focused Hamas is on military resistance and also how good they are at it, because that's not a message that can be permitted to get out into the world. But I just wanted, I know we're coming up to our time here, but I think these videos, John, are having even though they're not being shown on CNN or the BBC or the New York Times, they are very present on social media and they're having an impact, and Israel is aware of that impact. And I want to show you something that came across my Twitter or X timeline today that was actually a promoted tweet. That means that the people who put it up paid to promote it for people to see it. So can we run that? Can we show that tweet and run the little video that's in it, Tamara?
Just caught Hamas faking their own propaganda. I was scrolling through their official Telegram channel and I saw this video. It looked pretty bad, so I rewound it and then hit pause and accidentally landed on this frame. It didn't seem right. So I downloaded the video and then imported it into my editing software, and it's clearly two videos spliced together. This building is nowhere to be seen in the original scene. It gets better. The original video was posted by the IDF on their Twitter. Here's the building. They then deleted this section until this explosion. These guys are such amateurs, and yet somehow they've got the entire world fooled.
All right, so this video was put up by something called the Israel Advocacy Movement, which is a Israel lobby group. And of course, you're supposed to just think it's some guy who...
Yeah, he's just some regular guy.
He's just a regular guy.
With a cool beanie and a hoodie.
Yeah, he's
a regular guy.
He's on his way from the record store to brunch, and he decided to scroll through some Hamas Telegram channels. Well, when I saw this, of course, I looked at it very closely, and I can tell you, first of all, that that's not an official Hamas Telegram channel. We monitor the Hamas Telegram channels, and although it uses the logo, there's lots and lots of channels on Telegram claiming to be Hamas channels that are clearly not. They're just reposting things from here and there. This is one of them. And the other thing is that video that he claims to debunk is not a video that was ever published by Hamas. It doesn't have their logo. It didn't appear on any of their official Telegram channels. It's not a Qassam video like the ones we just watched. It's just some video that some random person made and put on Telegram, and then this Israel lobby group is claiming to debunk it because they want to cast doubt in people's minds that the genuine Qassam videos, like the ones that we just saw, are somehow fake. And I think, to me, that's a sign that that these videos and this reality is starting to filter through and bother them. People are starting to notice the Israeli army isn't actually that good. As we've said, of course, if it comes to murdering women and children, they are the go-to people. Nobody does it better than them. World experts at barbarism and savagery against civilians. But when it comes to actual fighting against other soldiers, they're not very good. So I just thought that was funny that they are they made that fake debunking. I mean, we debunk things all the time, but here they actually we debunked their debunking. I mean, I don't know. It's just we're getting into all sorts of.
The guy in that video, his name is Joseph Cohen. He's a Zionist from London. I wrote about him briefly in my book, and actually, there's a lot of people in the chat who recognize him because what he does is he goes along to sometimes to Palestinian solidarity demonstrations, smaller ones, with a GoPro, and he tries to sort of provoke people into saying things that he can then sort of twist in YouTube clips later. But the thing about this guy is, as you were kind of getting at, he's not just some guy. He actually has, I don't know exactly the ins and outs of his financial arrangements, but he does have links to the State of Israel. He has been to the Ministry of Strategic Affairs so-called digital conference in Jerusalem. So like a lot of pro-Israel lobby groups, he's not this grassroots effort that he claims to be.
Spectacular. Well, before we wrap up, I do believe we have our friend Ahmed Asamak back just for a minute or so. Ahmed, can you hear us now? Oh, now you're muted. Oh no. Okay, hold on. Let's unmute you. Okay. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
There you
I'm
are.
so sorry.
Okay,
It seems I had a problem with the internet, so sorry for that.
It's okay. It's okay. I think before we got cut off, we were just kind of talking about the unending nightmare that you and your family and your community is having to go through, but also, how Ali was talking about also how we're also not losing hope in the future for a liberated Palestine and being able to rebuild your house and being able to rebuild your city and your country after Zionism. And so
I'm hoping I'm going to get an invitation to your wedding, Ahmed. Because
all of you are
we had a lot of people in the chat saying you should get married.
Exactly. I love cake. I love weddings. They're so fun. So yeah, I can't wait for that. But when you
by the
think
way,
about...
a lot of people in Gaza have married recently, even during the war, but they didn't, of course, throw a wedding party.
We actually have a story about that.
Marriage.
We actually have a story about that at the Electronic Intifada. Maybe we can we'll be able to show it by our colleague Ruwaida Amer, who's in Gaza and who's continuing to write, and she writes that people in Gaza are still getting married, of course, without the celebrations. But it's a reminder that life goes on, and of course we talked about much earlier in this horrifying genocide the fact that 50,000 women are pregnant in Gaza, and so every day children are being born into a terrible, terrible, terrible situation, but they are being born and life will continue. Life has to continue, and that's what we owe to all those who have been murdered in this Holocaust, is that life and hope should continue, because the enemy wants people to give up hope and to give up on life.
Yes, exactly, Ali. The last thing I'd like to share, I've talked to many of my friends recently. Thankfully, there are some areas now in Gaza where there is an access to the internet. Most of them now are scared to death of starvation, not from bombing. And my brother yesterday went to El Bureij popular market and to El Nusayrat popular market, which are two of the biggest camps in the middle area, refugee camps in the middle area, just to buy food. And he didn't find anything, literally anything. He told me, Ahmed, I had found only cleaning tools and material. And he went back and he went home empty-handed. unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's what people are dealing with, and it's unspeakable and it's unbearable, and we are all wishing that it ends immediately, and that the reconstruction can begin. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, we look forward to having you back on the live stream, and we're so grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us again on the live stream today, my friend.
Thank you,
Thank you
Ahmed.
so much for having me again. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. And Ali, before we wrap up, I know that you have some important information about supporting our contributors and the work that we're doing.
Yes, just a quick update. As I mentioned previously, this is the month, December, when we every year raise most of the money that we need to keep the Electronic Intifada going for most of the year. And for our new viewers and new friends, we are not just this live stream, we are also the website that we've also shown, but there it is, where we are reporting. In fact, we are very proud that, like Ruwaida Amir, whose story we just showed, like Ahmed 𝐓𝐡𝐞, he's in Dublin now, but for the past couple of years, he was reporting from Gaza for us, and we are publishing every day reports from the ground. I see in the comments a lot of people are saying, what's the situation on the ground? You can read that directly from people who are living it at the Electronic Intifada. And that is the work that I'm most proud of, that we are able to provide this platform for the reporters and writers and photographers in Gaza, people like Mohammed Asad, whose videos we watched earlier in this live stream. And this is all supported by people like you. We pay all our writers and all our contributors, including those in Gaza. And so that's one of the things that your support helps us. So you can go to the Electronic Intifada and click donate now. And the other thing, equally important, is click on that get updates link there and sign up for our email list. You'll get our daily newsletter, which contains links to all of our articles. You'll also be notified when we're going to have live streams, so you don't miss any. And we know that not everybody can make a financial contribution, and that's perfectly okay. We're only asking you to do so if you can. If you can't, what we want you to do, we want everyone to do, is to share the work, the articles, the live streams, the videos, send them to friends and family, post them on your social media. We want this work, this reporting to be free and available to everyone. So when you make a gift, you're helping us to share this information with everyone. We don't have a paywall. We will never have a paywall. This work will always be free and available to the world. That's our mission as an independent non-profit publication. So just to say again, thank you to everyone for all your support, for viewing today, for reading, for sharing. We just cannot do this without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. And yes, we cannot do this without you. Thank you once again to all of our viewers and our listeners. Be sure to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube. And please share the stories that you read on the Electronic Intifada. It really helps. On behalf of Ali, Asa, and John, I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman, and we will be back with you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.